There we go. Well, hi everyone. This is another conversation with Neal and I. We're getting down into it. We have plenty to talk about, so I put together a few topics here to get us started. Last time we had a really good conversation about video games and art and ritual, and so just wanted to kind of mix it up, but then also kind of go back to some of that. Um, One of the things we've been talking about a little bit is about this left and right brain in art and these um, kind of interplays of, I don't know, this idea that like the left brain is the more authoritative side, the strict boundaries kind of side, and the right side is tends to be associated with the more creative side of art and life in general, and talking about the interplay of that. And I was gonna pitch to you an idea of what I thought about how these interplay, and then you can tell me what you think about it. But I had a good conversation with my friend Bo, and he's a designer, and his dad's a professor of art, I think, or architecture. Sorry, not art. But he's an artist himself, and um, in our exchange, I think one of the ways that we processed this was that the left brain is more about the technical skill of the art, and then the connection side of art is the right brain. And so this interplay, you can't have one without the other. And so that's how we were starting to frame it, but I wasn't sure what you thought about that conception.
Yeah, I think that's right. I had a conversation over the Friday, yeah, it was Friday, with this guy John, and that came out on Chad's channel today. But I gave the example of Mozart in that, yeah, I'm sure there's people out there know Mozart better than I do, but my understanding of his genius or his art is that he just saw the music in his head and then he wrote it down.
Mhm.
So for Mozart, it wasn't even that he was like struggling with the artistic process. He just saw it or had it already, and then just so he was a transcriptionist. Like he was a window, basically. And when you said the right side is the connection, for me, like someone like Mozart, the connection is just 100%. It's whatever he's connected to, it's he's fully connected to
Mhm.
whatever he's meant to see, you could say, he just sees it. Um, so artistic genius would be that, because I think of art as a struggle, really, because it's an iterative process where something's received and then you have to use your technical skill and apply it, and then you see your application of what was received. And then you say, oh, I don't like that, or I don't like this, and then you have to apply another technical skill on it, and it has to be this back and forth, back and forth. And with someone like Mozart, it's like, no, he just saw the final form of whatever that was. And to me, I'm sort of leading the witness here, but to me, that speaks of art, not like we think of art as this transjective thing, as this relationship between us and the object, let's say. And I think that's true, but what it really is the there's the transjective between us and the object, but then there's the object's transjective to the source of the art, whatever that source is. Like wherever Mozart is getting, oh, I just saw the music and I wrote it down. So
Mhm.
I asked this question on a estuary meeting. Yeah, I think you heard that. That was the first estuary that we did publicly, where I'm like, is music discovered or invented? And people
Mhm.
are like on the fence about that. And I'm like, no, no, I'm pretty sure all of art, to the extent that it is art, is discovered. And maybe certain art is a more perfect discovery than other art. That's the more I think about this, the more I'm pretty confident that that's the case. Um, so I mean, we could talk about Plato. I bet you know more about Plato and Plato's forms than I do. But as I understand it, it's kind of like the idea of like a tree, the idea of whatever that art is in its final form. So anyway, that's how I think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe I would frame Mozart a little differently. 'Cause I would say that his technical skill is so strong that he doesn't have a barrier between him and the art on the other side, right? The barrier is basically him. He doesn't have this gap of communication, and so there's this very thin region, and so I think that's what makes his art or his explanation of his art so impressive is that um, he just feels like he has to write it down versus someone who, I don't know, you have a story in mind, and to be able to put it on the page isn't the same, isn't as easy as just writing the story down because there's a lot of stuff that goes into a story that's a lot more than just putting it onto paper. That takes a lot of technical skill to be able to reach that point of being able to do that. Um, and one part that came out of this conversation that I found really interesting is that the the relationship between an artist and technical skill varies significantly. Like there's some mediums of art that are not extremely difficult, that you can express yourself pretty easily, but you may not be able to express yourself as fully. You don't have as much fine tuning of controls. Or sometimes you have these situations where there's a lot of famous artists who don't even touch anything. They don't touch the medium itself. They have all their followers doing a lot of the work, and their job is to be fully conceptual, and they're doing it. You kind of see that with directors, like
Yeah,
directors for the most
James
part.
Cameron came to my mind with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, especially James Cameron because he has such an impact on like the visual effects artists stuff. Everybody looks at him, but he's not doing any of the visual effects stuff. He's finding someone else to do that, but
But
he's
he's the
communicating.
critic. Yeah, he's the critic who's saying not
Yeah,
like this, like that. Like he's being
exactly.
ruthless in his interpretation of what they're creating. Yeah.
Also, I think of like Hideo Kojima, like these like game directors who are really well known for like leading the genre. He made Metal Gear Solid and a
Mm,
few of these
mm.
other games. Um, and uh, he understands general mechanics, he understands narrative. He might do writing, like a lot of these game directors or like project leads will do some work on that end, but very few of them are like putting stuff into a level in a video game or writing any code. They're communicating their vision and having the people who are actually very technically skilled at that thing do the thing. And there's a lot of problems with that that can come up. Just communicating between people is not necessarily easy, but one of the examples that keeps getting presented to me is also this artist. He's really famous for making those like metal balloon dogs that are very large. He doesn't touch any of the metal, the artist associated with that. He just has a vision of what he wants to be made, and communicates it to people who have the technical like welding ability to create it. And so there's some interesting dynamics about like, is there a type of artist like that who um, can get away with not having a strong left brain uh, side to their art and can kind of fully focus on the right brain. But
No, that's a really it's a really interesting. I have three or four different strands that I'm trying to keep track of in relation to what you just brought up. Okay. So one is that I thought of Mozart in, let's say, a different time and setting where he has different technical instruments available to him. So
mm,
I'm curious if the music, and I don't know the answer to this, but the music that he's receiving, does he receive it in like a purely abstract form, devoid of all instrumentation? Or does he
yeah,
receive it in the embodied form with those specific instruments? So James Cameron, so let me contrast this to James Cameron, because my understanding of James Cameron is he had certain ideas where, and there are various directors that have this, where they have certain ideas where they say, the technology is not yet there to implement the vision that I have. I think, why am I blanking? George Lucas had that, but the problem is the improved New Hope episode 4 was way worse than the original. So I don't know what to make of that. that like he felt like he didn't have the technology he needed to do A New Hope properly. And yet and I think the overwhelming critical majority, and not even critical, the overwhelming majority of viewers would say that the original is more timeless and far better because the technology always improves. And so there's something, yeah, so to not answer your question, I guess, is so to go back to your question, is there something that you could just receive in the purely abstract form that doesn't require that medium, that in between? And I was thinking about the ideal for an artist would be an AI that you could just talk to, because talking is our most common means of communication. So you would say, I want it like this, and the AI creates it, and then you see it on the screen and you say, no, 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 I want it more like this and less like that, and more like this and more like that. So Unreal Engine, for example, they have the MetaHuman Creator, which you can check out for free, and I earn 10%. That's just a joke, Unreal. That's just a joke. But MetaHuman Creator, one of the ways it works is you start with three faces of you basically pick three people, and then you say, I want the nose to look more like this one, and you kind of drag it in, you drag how you want the nose in between those three people, and then you could put three more people and say like, oh, I want the nose kind of in between these two, and it takes on halfway the features of. So it's this visual representation of the possibilities in between the space. However, with MetaHuman Creator, you're still limited by the structure, the form, the technology, the underlying embodiment of whatever that vision is. And so the same thing happens for Mozart because he's limited by the instruments that he has at that time. The same thing is limiting James Cameron because he's limited by the technology he has. He can't do the water scenes he wants until, the most recent. And I haven't seen Avatar 2, by the way, because I heard it was, plot wise was awful. So yeah, I'm not, yeah. Anyway, so I maybe that's because I find myself increasingly disillusioned or not caring about the instrumentation and caring more about the source. Yeah, so
Mhm.
like I'm way more fascinated by that right brain stuff, like where that's coming from. And in relation to AI, like I'm hugely fascinated by, can AI actually create original art or music? Uh, or really, can the AI only do what MetaHuman can do, which is blend existing things? And because I don't think art is simply a blending of existing techniques. I think there's something elusive to art that is received, that is transcendent, that's beyond us. And I think over the coming decades, that question is going to be answered because as the AI gets better and better, inevitably we're going to see, okay, can the AI make better music than
Mhm.
than a human? So and so the best Go player in the world is actually not the AI. The best Go player in the world is an AI partnered with a very strong human Go team. Have you ever seen the documentary Alpha Go?
I don't think so, no.
No. Okay, so Go is I'm pretty sure it's Chinese. Could be Japanese, but I'm pretty sure it's Chinese.
Mhm.
But it's way more technically complicated than chess. So they were
Yeah.
thinking that AI is not going to be able to beat humans at this and da 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 da. And they were wrong. Like AI is better than humans and they can beat humans. But the point I'm making is that if the AI plays itself and one side of the AI has humans to help it and the other side does not, the side with the humans wins because the humans are seeing things in a way that the pure AI cannot see it.
Mhm.
Um, and I suspect the future of art is like that, where the let's say the musician or the composer or the DJ or whatever, they can kind of the AI can get a sense of what they want, but the really good artists, the really good ones, will do something that the AI cannot anticipate, that the AI, I don't know. I mean, that's what we call genius. The thing that is not anticipated and is not able to be anticipated and is still received. And that's the undefinable, that's sort of beyond it. That's the way I anticipate art going, is that to get to like that really good level, you could probably just use an AI. Like writing, you could probably just use an AI. But to create like a Lord of the Rings level story, it's going to need something else.
Well, and I think that's what I was trying to get at with this connection bit. It's not just connection to a transcendent, like, you know, a muse or the forms or God, which I think that's part of it, but it's also a connection to other people and to what you're going through personally. Um, and I just don't think it means as much. I don't know if that's context, like of the artwork itself, or if that is um part of the process itself. But there's something to like, I don't know. If I listen to a song and know that this song like is the outcome of this personal tragedy a person like somebody went through, I have a fuller, I don't know, I'm more engaged with that than, you know, an AI trying to poke each button and to say like, oh, this is like a sad part and this is um I don't know, this is something that probably would connect with somebody. There's something deeper there. I don't know if I could like, you know, again, put it to words entirely, but yeah.
Yeah, the most impactful art is intensely personal.
Mhm.
And yeah, you're 100% right. So last time we talked, we talked about the nesting, like the layers. Um, but the reason I bring up Mozart is because I love the movie Amadeus. And I'm sure like you put Mozart in the top of composers and it's like Bach, Mozart, and who am I missing? Handel and I'm missing Beethoven.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's like the big four or big five. I don't know. There are musical experts out there that are going to school me and say you forgot this and Vivaldi and okay, fine. Like, but the reason that Mozart sticks out to me is because of the movie Amadeus, and because
Mhm.
that movie was, I would say, formative in. Yeah, I loved that movie as a teenager. It was one of my favorite movies, and yeah, so it became more personal. Like the music grabbed me more intensely because of that personal story of Mozart and his tragedy, even though a lot of Amadeus is speculative about a lot of things. And anyway, but I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
But I think that I don't know. I'm trying to play it out in my head, and the idea that like, oh, an AI could make up a persona and put it online and say this is the artist and this is what they were going through when they made this, and um, but I think a lot of this is built off of trust. And as soon as any of that trust is broken, some people will react nonetheless, and they'll just go with it. Um, but I think there's going to be people who can't play along with the LARP in a certain sense. Like they're just not going like um they're going to need more verification of whoever they are following. Like they're going to need that personal connection and to be like, I don't know. I know Phil down the street. I know he wrote this song for his wife, and I can connect with that versus what somebody wrote, what some robot wrote. But
What you're speaking to is why Taylor Swift is so popular.
mhm, yeah.
Because the initial connection that was made by teenagers was continued and established as they followed her life and her tragedies and her shortcomings and like everything that she went through. And so every time she goes through that, as long as, to your point, as long as she keeps the trust with their audience, as long as she's being genuine and pouring her heart out, then that relationship grows, and the transjective, the relationship with her audience only gets stronger with time. So that every concert, it sort of builds that relationship, builds that relationship. They are part of her story, and she's kind of pulling them into adulthood almost.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, and that goes along with the difference between a singer and a singer-songwriter. That you have, I don't know, a lot of people, and I assume it's a lot of people because I thought this for a long time. But I'm like, oh, everybody who sings a song, they wrote that song with somebody else or with somebody like in collaboration. And then I realized like all of a sudden I'm like, oh, like no, that's why there's this distinction at all of like why people will say singer-songwriters because most people will just buy songs from people who write songs and they'll perform them and then they have their catalog of things they perform, but they may have no personal connection to this. And if they have any, they've had to develop it. Like this is a thing that they've had to workshop.
I think that's why Chad is so focused on Sleep Token. And don't get me wrong, I've had Do You Wish That You Loved Me? I've had that song DYW. I can't do acronyms all that well. I've had that song stuck in my head for the last couple of days. Thank you, Chad. Thanks for that. But the reason it is the relational in that so the art initially grabs you and then you get to know the story and it's like, oh, this is different, and the story pulls you in. And
Mhm.
yeah,
Well, and I've noticed that for especially with music, like every musician that I've like dove into and have gotten really interested in, um, a few of them have gotten songs from other places, but for the most part, they are all writers in themselves. And if they're not, they have an extreme personality that shows through the songs nonetheless. Like the ghostwriter is writing for them.
like
And then
Nick
they're able to
Cave.
connect. Nick Cave, I think, is one of those people who writes himself. Like they're all about something that's going on in his life, and he's had a lot of stuff that's going on. So, that's one of
Yeah.
them. Um, but then like Me Without You is another band where it's very clear that like there is that the lead singer's personality is coming through in all the lyrics he's writing. And they're very integral to his background as somebody who grew up in a house with um, two parents who converted to Islam, and but one was originally Christian and one was originally Jewish, and so he has all this kind of history that he's kind of bargaining between, and but still feeling a call to like some sort of spiritualness, but then also kind of rebelling against stuff, and so being able to process all that, and I'm like, oh, I can connect to um, all these emotions and feelings, and I don't know, it's hard to do that when you realize like, oh, this person just bought this song off somebody else and that song got turned down by this other artist. And Glimpse of Us is one of these songs. I don't know if you're familiar with that song, but
No.
it's an amazing song. um Whoever wrote it was really impressive, and it's performed by this artist Joji, and he does a really good job performing it, but um it's not his that he wrote. And so there's something a little bit lost when I found that out. I'm like, oh, like that's not you, that's somebody else. Um, but it still doesn't change that it's a very good song. And so there's a wrestling inside of me of like, where does that lie?
Yeah, I could think of one song in particular that is in that vein. I don't know if they wrote it. I assume they wrote it, but it seems so different than the rest of their work. So the song is Come Sail Away by Styx. I think it was written in 1980 or 1970. It came out in 1980, 1979. But I like Styx as a band, but not on the level I like that song. Like that song Come Sail Away is I think it's one of the best rock songs, maybe one of the best songs ever written. And it's so like above and beyond the rest of their work. So I'm kind of curious now. Did they write it? I can look at that. But also I feel like in those situations, I would wager the artist would say like, yeah, we just received something. Like we just felt this and we played it. And then is
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know.
Well, that's hard too, right? Like, I don't know. For a lot of people, they talk about when they're creating, it's not them, it's something outside of themselves. And so is that very different than having a song written by someone else?
Mhm.
Um, I
The
think there is an
muse.
element, yeah, the muse. But at the same time, I think that's where that I don't know. I think it's interesting that to have these two images of the director who is not technically involved with the work, and the singer but not songwriter who is entirely technically involved with the work, but not necessarily connected to it, and to have these two kind of edge figures, um, because there is something about being personally connected that has an impact, but it's not clear to me how to articulate that fully.
Yeah, I think to go back to the the technical side being changed or improved. I think both sides can be improved with time.
Mhm.
So in my religious conversion, I got way more creative, which is a very weird thing.
It's usually not a normal thing with people from what I've heard is that when they if they were creative before a conversion, usually it goes down somewhat. And that just anecdotally.
so for me, I was, I would say, fairly creative before, uh, but not like off the charts level. In that, I I wanted to play the drums. I wrote a story. I wrote a book. But I wasn't. It didn't hold me. Like it didn't have a absolute grip on me. It was like this. It was more like, oh, this is something I want to do, and I'll regret it if I don't. I'll regret it at the end of my life if I don't do this to the best of my ability. And actually, even so, the biggest thing I did creatively was write a novel. But and I did that because a close friend of mine committed suicide, and that was the psychological impetus. In Jungian terms, that was the creative energy, the psychic energy that made me do it, because I was talking to him about this idea, and my friend committed suicide, and I felt like I owed it to him to do it. It wasn't even that; it was like a way of honoring his memory. And in my my religious conversion occurred because my brother passed away, and I told, that was in my initial randos conversation with Chad, so I won't rehash that. But what was weird about it, and I'm not really prepared to talk about it, but I could do more research on it next time we talk. But there's a term called creative illness, and Carl Jung had this exact same thing. So there was a point in Carl Jung's career where because his ideas were straying from Sigmund Freud's, and Freud was kind of his mentor, and Freud had so much status and clout, and that split basically ruined Jung's career for a while and left him kind of alone in darkness. And Jung talked about, during that time, that was when he wrote the Red Book, which is like the series of all of his dreams and all the images. And he just, he was still a psychiatrist during that time. It wasn't like he was emotionally completely unstable. Like he was married, he had a family, like he practiced psychiatry, but in the back of his mind, like his whole identity was being reshapen during that time. And that's what happened during my I found a lot of solace in that idea of the creative illness, because I had this deep like the most depressed I was in my entire life. And I knew it was depression because it wasn't like, it fluctuated a little bit, but it was like steady, and it wasn't even nihilism. I won't even say it was nihilism, because at the
Mhm.
same time I had this like kernel of faith that I really did believe in, and that faith was growing stronger with time. But like what I found to be interesting was that despite um in the depths, like in the worst time, I was going to mass every morning, and that was enough for me to get through my day. It was like enough to sustain the suffering, is a nice way of putting it. But it wasn't and looking back at looking on it in retrospect, I very much see the hand of God there. Like, yep, you're suffering as much as you can take, and it's all for your formation. Like that's how I see it right now. Like that suffering was necessary for me to get to a certain place. Um a better place, a much better place. So uh but during that time, what actually got me slightly out of the worst of my depression, and I won't say like out of it, but like what got me even enough out of it that I was much more functional. Um, I was functional still, but I mean like n not constantly grappling with it, like to the point where I could have a pretty normal day. What got me out of that was starting to write, because I had these crazy. I talked about this before, but like
Mhm.
I think what happened is the whole edifice of how I saw reality had just been completely dismantled, had been completely demolished, and just stuff flowing in like crazy. Like I had this desire to write that I never, it wasn't even a desire. I'll call it a compulsion. Like I had so much just coming into me that I had to get it. I had to express it somehow. And thankfully I realized that like, I'm not in a position to talk about this. I was so disorganized. I was so, and a lot of it was resentful stuff, but like there was just so much coming in that that's where I felt like my creativity was at its highest. And I also knew that is the kind of thing where like, don't worry about the quality of this right now. Just go. And or I another way of putting that is I had faith in the process in that like I also had a sense that this wasn't going to last. Like that's kind of weird, but it's easy to say that in retrospect that like, oh, I'll get better, I'll get out of this depression and I won't be as creative. But I had this sense, and maybe it's because of the creative illness. I know I keep pointing this way because the I always do that. So this is called The Discovery of the Unconscious. And it's by Ellen Berger, and I had to get a used copy. It is a crazy long book, man. Like it's
Dang.
but anyway, so the creative illness was this is on Peterson's reading list, and I think I'm one of the few people in the corner who actually read this thing, but this thing is useful. And yeah, so I didn't read some of the neuroscience stuff, but like the history of psychology, that fascinates me. And that book is like the history of psychology, starting with this guy called Janet, and then leads to Freud and Adler and Jung. It's really those four guys. So it's not all of psychology, but it's anyway. It's like the symbolic archetypal dream. All the left brain psychology stuff is in this book. All the stuff that I care about in psychology, which is the left, or no, sorry, right brain, right
Right
brain.
brain. Yeah.
Yeah, the artistic stuff. Yeah, okay. I'm sort of rambling here. I'm sorry, no.
No
But
worries.
the creative illness, that gave me some comfort that I wasn't alone in having this creative kind of flurry being in a depression. So like, okay, I'm not alone. And then also, I think it gave me a sense that like there is a light. My faith gave me a sense that there's a light at the end of this tunnel, and my faith was growing, and that was comforting that I'm heading in the right direction. And then simultaneously, I had the sense that like, okay, as I come out of this depression, I'm not going to have the same level of new ideas and information kind of flowing into me. So I was like, I gotta get it out. And so, yeah, so now I have hundreds and hundreds of pages of stuff that I just have to like go through at some point, in addition to the game idea that I actually wrote where, yeah, anyway, so which inspired game development, which inspired all. Anyway, long way of saying that, yes, I was equally surprised by that too, but maybe that was the grace from God that it was the path that led me out. So led me out of the darkness, I guess you could say. Yeah.
I heard this quote today, and I don't know who said it originally, but someone said that like writing is thinking on paper, and that's what a writer does, or any artist for that matter, is that they're processing, or at least they should be. I think that's supposed to be put opposed to um, more of a didactic type of like art of probably like I think the most obvious example is probably Ayn Rand, of like this person who
Propaganda is another
yeah
way of putting it.
yeah um and not actually exploring the ideas, but just telling it to people. And so yeah, that was one thing I wanted to talk to you about too, is you were talking about this theory of art as being um you have to be put into this. Not, you don't have to be put. It can only come out of this struggle, and you don't really have control over whether or not it happens. I think that's something along what you said.
Yeah,
But part of my thought is, it seems to me you can choose to be in those places, and that is an
sure.
important distinction to make too. Now, I wanted to kind of walk down that way with you, because I think you can easily just see something coming and plug your ears and go the other direction. But sometimes what you need to do, especially if you're making art, but even just in living life, is see the storm coming and be willing to walk in that direction, because you know that if you ignore it now, then there's a whole bunch of other stuff that could happen, and being willing to process that.
So that instinct of seeing the storm coming and deciding to go straight in, that's correct. I can say firsthand from experience that is correct. It's much better to go straight in, to accept it. In Dune terms, I assume they have this in the movie because it's all over the book, but I will face my fear and let it pass through me, and then only I will remain, right?
Mhm.
That's the Dune line that makes me think of that. But that's correct. There's that final stage of grief with it, which is acceptance. But I think those stages apply to any struggle that you go through. It's like once you can accept it, then you're ready for it, and then it passes through you. And you can definitely choose to be in those places. So that goes back, to the beginnings of any faith tradition, which is the fasting and the going into a desert place, a quiet place to pray, the deliberate separation of yourself from the comforts of your life in order to in order to bring about some kind of metamorphosis, some kind of positive change. We don't have those adolescent test your mettle as a man rituals anymore, where you've seen the movie 300.
I haven't, no.
Oh man, it's a good
I
one.
have
I
I have
mean,
very big holes in my
yeah,
literacy of certain things.
you've seen a lot. You've seen a ton. But the beginning of the movie 300 talks about the Spartan lifestyle, and it's 300 is this overly dramatic, over the top film, but it's a lot of fun. It's a great time. And but the future king is sent out into the wilderness as an adolescent to basically survive and hunt, and there's a wolf stalking him, and it's one-on-one versus the wolf, and he's tested. And um yeah, but so yeah, you could choose to be in those places yourself. Sometimes your culture puts it or forces it upon you. Sometimes we take it into our own hands, and what I mean by that is, why go to Burning Man and and take and drop acid, or you know, uh, microdose on LSD for extra creativity. I don't know if that's a rhyme, but all that stuff, that kind of the shortcut to trying to get something. So with those, if you're trying to get here's a way of thinking about it. If you're trying to get the gift, if you're trying to get the so Pajot would say, if you're trying to get the fruits without making the requisite sacrifice, then something something bad is going to happen, or you're not going to get what you intend if you try to shortcut. Jung said, beware of unearned wisdom.
Mm.
uh it's the kind of thing where, if you're fully willing to accept the consequences, and if you're doing it for the right reasons. So an example for me is, like, I have a sense that at some point I'm going to need to go on a silent retreat, where it's like at least 3, 7, 30 days. I don't know how long. I have a sense of that, but I haven't had that sense that it's like that I need to do that now. And that's not something that's going to help my family. Like, if I'm absent for a week, and
Mm.
already, like, I have to go, because my parents, I'm the eldest son now, and my parents live about 6 hour drive away, and they're getting older and they have health challenges, and so I have to be there from time to time. Um, so it's the kind of thing where, if I'm trying to, let's say, if I'm trying to do something to grasp creativity, or to grasp something that I want, or to get something, it's probably not going to work out. It's definitely not going to work out in the way I intend it to. Nothing, nothing I've ever, let me put it this way, nothing big, nothing substantive, nothing that really mattered that I set out to do ever worked out the way I intended it to work out, ever,
Mhm.
in my entire life. Nothing. getting married, being a father, like my plans, like man plans and God laughs. Like that's the thing. However, what I will say is that those things that I sacrificed for in all of those veins, whether it's my job, my family, whatever, if I sacrificed for those things in a positive direction, the fruits of that sacrifice is it's way better than anything I intended. Like there's no other way to say it.
Hmm.
Like the story that has unfolded for me like is way better than the story I would have picked for myself. Like the story I would have picked for myself is being like climbing the corporate hierarchy and like that, being in a position of power and importance and people are respecting me and all this da, 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 da. And my life is way better now. It's like way better than that. Like way better. And it's like with the faith that I've received, it's like everyone's, you know, everyone's out there on the open ocean without a paddle. Not everyone, but many are. Or many are very sure that they're sailing in the right direction. And they're out there with their steamships sailing in the right direction. And I don't know, within TLC, it feels like we have this secret power that and I don't want that to be hubris because there's a danger to that too, but it feels like I always I always have the sense of like we can't convince people, anyone, that one way is better than another. We can't do it. However, we can be there if and when they choose to join us, or if and when they change their mind, or if and when they need to be loved in any way, shape, or form. And so I had the secret joy within me is like, come on, like it's better over here. Come on, it's a better it's better Mission Impossible over here. There the materialism is not that cool of a game. Like this is a way better game. Come on, come on, come on, it's better. And anyway, so like the way I see myself now is not trying to get anything. Like I'm not even trying to like get the game I'm trying to make. As weird as that sounds, like I was thinking about this and I was like, if I just spend 5 years just playing and learning and making this thing that I like really enjoy doing, and I do that in all the bits and pieces in the spare time that I have in between conversations and relationships, and while like making sure my family is supported and loved first, like that's awesome. Like anyway, I like, and
Yeah.
anyways, there's a long way of saying like all of the creative blessings I've been given. I felt like every time I've tried to seize something, like I'm, yeah, it hasn't worked out. Every time I've trying to get something, but every time instead of trying to get something, if I just say, "Oh, I love working on this game. It's just a ton of fun to work on it." Like if I fall in love with the process of the creativity and
Hmm.
I ceased trying to get an outcome, and I really love the process, and I can give thanks that I love the process because that is the story. Like the story is not you getting an outcome. It's not because the
That's
outcome
a
is your
transaction.
well, yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
And the outcome is you're dead. Like that's the outcome. The story is the moments in every single thing. It's right here. It's right now. Um, Another way of putting that is when St. Paul says, "Pray without ceasing." It's like, are you aiming for the best? Yeah, I'm channeling Peterson. It's like, are you aiming for the best possible thing right here, right now? That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I get up on my high horse.
No, yeah. There's one thing that came to my mind, and um, there was a point I had a lot of extra time on my hands, and I was in college, and I decided I'd heard enough about Gulag Archipelago that I was going to sit down and at least read the first volume.
Mhm.
And and I feel like that was one of those moments of knowing that I'm going to read something that's incredibly depressing and it's going to be about a whole bunch of people suffering uh horribly. But I knew that like I was going to give my time and my attention to it, and it was going to be an emotional experience. And I knew all these things beforehand, but I didn't know what I was going to get out of it. But I knew that if I didn't engage with it, um, not that I wouldn't be honest, but I would be more honest on the other side of it. That I would be able to not, I couldn't say that the world was perfect on the other end. I had to be able to see the worst things and be able to say like, okay, I I'm not ignorant of that. Um, and I think that was one of those moments for me. I'm just processing that and again, not knowing what was going to come out on the other end, but being willing to I guess play. And play might be a good word um to engage, uh to participate.
What is it about being able to play that came from reading something as dark as the Gulag Archipelago?
I think it's the difference between like you're you can shut yourself in and you can engage with only things that will make you feel good and talk to only to people who will compliment you or tell you the nice things, but being able to have the back and forth and to have something that challenges um, the way you see the world. I don't know. It's not play as in fun, like haha, but like it's it's wrestling, it's sport. I think it's a little maybe closer to that.
What one thing I noticed about Chad that I really loved that made me want to emulate was that he tries to do everything possible to look bad on the surface. Uh, so what I mean by that is like he'll act like the most awkward lobster monkey in the world and just be like make a video that just makes him like for lack of a better word and he does this deliberately to look cringe.
Hmm.
And because and the same thing with the mask and all of it. So and when I figured out I haven't figured out Chad, but like what I realize he's doing is he's giving you every excuse to not follow what he's doing. You know, like not care. But so you look past the if you can look past the surface, and then it's like, oh, then you're in real territory because it's not the shiny thing glinting in the moonlight and the starlight that catches your eye. It's like, oh, I want that shiny commercial, whatever it is, you know. It's something that's far more substantive. Um, and so every time I do a Tom Lukeson thing, I have this initial realization where I'm like, oh, I'm trying to be too funny or too so like I have to do something that like makes like deliberately makes me look stupid. Like I have to deliver so I'll get up and I'll be like I'll be doing this dance and I'll be like, you know, just do so like I can't
Hmm.
embody the lobster monkey as well as Chat. Like I still get self-conscious more than he does. But I can lean into the foolishness of you know like if I'm trying to protect an image or something, right? And I can sort of I can be consciously aware that I'm worried about my image, and then I can ask myself like, okay, where's that coming from? Is that a good fear or a bad fear? um because sometimes it's a good fear. Like sometimes maybe you don't want to make art that's you know uh sacrificing children on an altar or something like that, right? Like maybe there are certain things that you really just don't want to entertain or whatever it is.
Hmm.
But if because it's just not a good idea to pursue that. Um, but maybe you're avoiding doing something because you're afraid, oh, people will. It's kind of like the Joaquin Phoenix, I feel like, leans into this, but maybe that's just his personality where he's just so dark. He doesn't care what people think of him, right? You know, he just,
Well, he's
um,
he's pretty far into the method acting too, which I think it
yeah.
plays a portion into that. Of
Mm,
like, I know if you think you are like, there's nothing like a method actor who is
yeah.
fully in it.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
there's something freeing about being willing to be foolish.
Hmm.
Um, but foolish for the right reasons, I guess. There's a quote in, I forget which epistle it is, but it's the uh for the, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm messing this up, but it's like the wisdom of men is nothing compared to the foolishness of God or something like that. But I really like that quote. Um, because it's, you know, the wisdom is like how to live properly or how to get what you want, right? Or something like that.
Well, I
Um,
think the people that I've always admired most are the people who can um say something very thoughtful and meaningful in a
mm,
very simple way, and that can be communicated to anyone. And I think the person who I think maybe doesn't get enough credit for this is Fred Rogers, of Mr. Rogers
Mr.
fame.
Rogers' Neighborhood. Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And his ability to connect with people. Um, I think the thing that everybody seems to say about him in every documentary and um, in every place is that when he made people feel heard was one that he always seemed present and able to connect in that way, but then also that he was able to connect emotionally um, to people of all ages, like being able to connect to the lowest and care for young children, but then also be able to do the same with adults and never talk down to anyone. I think that was also the impressive part about him is that he never talked down to children or anything and pretended to know more than them, but was willing to walk with them very humbly. And so,
That's neat. Yeah, I remember that movie came out, but I haven't seen it. I did watch Mr. Rogers as a kid. I was that old. I am that old. Um, always had the sweater. In the neighborhood. In
see,
the
I just
neighborhood.
got reruns now.
In the neighborhood. No, no, wait, that's Sesame Street. PVK
No,
sang that song.
it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Yeah.
Hmm.
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. There's a different neighborhood song I'm thinking of. Yeah. And that one I got stuck in my head because PVK sang it. It was members only. He didn't release his singing to the
Oh,
public. Yeah. You got to become a member. I can go get my members only jacket if you, and maybe I'll mail it to you. Then you could become a member.
there we go. Yeah.
Yeah, I seriously have a members only jacket, but
You have the jacket too. He was handing
there,
those out. Yeah.
sorry, you might not even get that reference, but in Seinfeld, there's, I think, one episode George Costanza has like is obsessed with this jacket because like his jacket's gonna get him ladies or whatever, and
Mhm.
you know it's like a members only jacket, and the joke is like, "Are you the last member?" Like, no, I don't know. Anyway, it's neither here nor there. We could change the subject. We got a whole bunch of other things.
We do. I
Yeah,
can I can go back to something if you want.
sure.
Something we were talking about before. We were talking about art and um, being able to express through various mediums, and Mozart having only a limited number of instruments or something like that,
Mhm.
and how some mediums are much more expressive and some are not as expressive. Uh, but this idea of framing art, because as soon as you choose a medium, as soon as you take on that, you are accepting the limitations on your ability to communicate. You can't, if you choose to make a painting, you can't, uh, it can't be a song. And if you do a song and a painting, then you're missing out on something else.
Challenge
And
accepted.
yeah,
No, I'm just
but
kidding.
then as soon as if you try to throw everything together, right? There are also limitations to that because you can't reflect everything in your art, even if you have all the pieces. I think video games are one of these, even though you have all these pieces accessible to you. Um, you can't have everything. And often the limitations are actually the strengths of art. One I'll keep going back to is H.P. Lovecraft in writing about like Cthulhu. He writes about, you know, a being that's beyond comprehension, that the sight of him will make you go mad. And so there's no other, like you can do that in only um verbal ways. You can only talk about him, because as soon as you try to depict Cthulhu, you're missing the point, because at that point you've you've messed it all up. And he excels at that of describing things that are contradictory as a way to evoke fear, um, and to reflect that. And so, yeah, that's been something I've been processing, and that triggered something in my head.
Yeah, the I would say the number one mistake new game developers make is they try to take on too much too quickly, and they burn themselves out or they get discouraged.
Mhm.
So it's the framing problem is that they don't reach low enough to start. Um, and that limitations are the strengths of art. I agree with that completely. Uh, you know, Minecraft at first glance is like that, where you're looking at this blocky and you're like, what, like there's nothing going on, there's nothing to do, but it's just there's so much to do. And you said as soon as you choose a medium, then you're limited, but you're also the medium becomes the opportunity to make something. You can't really be creative until it's embodied in one way, shape, or form. You have to have a medium.
Mhm.
Um, Trying to think of any example where this is the case. You know, any music has to have a medium. Any art has to have a medium.
Well, that's the thing. Art is, when we talk about art, we don't talk about the idea behind art.
Mm.
We're almost always talking about the body of the thing,
Hmm.
and then whatever connections to the spirit
Hmm.
of that piece.
But
But
even a story has to have characters, plot, time, place, setting. It has to be relatable on a human. Now it can jump around. It can do all sorts of fancy things.
well, that's
Uh,
where, is the story the spirit, or is the story the medium? Because I would say it kind of fills multiple roles, and so I think it can kind of
mhm.
jump between. But I'd say the narrative is closer to the spirit, and then how it plays out is the body. So like I can tell the same story five different ways. I could say from a scientific materialist explanation of what happened when I went to the grocery store, versus a first person narrative of this experience, to a third person narrative, like a narrative, but each one might be focusing on my interactions with people, or another one is um, the things I was thinking about as I was picking out each item. Um, and so each of these are the same story, but they are, it depends on what you mean by story again. It's the same kind of unifying element, but expressed in very different ways.
I think the story combines both, or it has to. Yeah, like it still can't be fully because that's where I'll bring Jung back into it. You can't have a story that's pure archetypal forms. I think Peterson was even
Mhm.
asked this once and talked about it, where it's like, okay, if we're telling the same stories over and over and over again, like why not just tell the same story over and over and over again? And whatever one's the best one, we just keep telling that one. Like why do we keep having to tell different stories? And Peterson's answer was because people, place, time, all those things change. Like the setting all changes. So the pattern, the underlying patterns, the archetypes, that's what Jung would call the archetypes. Uh, I mean, they're consistent because human nature is relatively consistent. Maybe human nature changes over time, but I don't know. But so the patterns of like revenge or redemption or uh true love or like all those archetypes, like in order to tell a story about those themes, they have to have people, places, things, and the
Mhm.
people have individual personalities, and the place also has a spirit. So the story unites both. It's heaven and earth both.
Mhm.
And I thought the other thing I thought of as you were talking about this is God number one, God number two, which PBK hasn't talked too much about God number one, God number two lately. But
No. Yeah.
back in the olden days of TLC, I always got them mixed up. But one of them is the
Agent.
agent, and one is the arena.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's this constant tension. And so I always saw the Trinity. I shouldn't say I always saw it. Like
I always knew this.
I always do. But the Trinity is God number one, God number two, and the in between. And
Mhm.
the separate because it's like okay, you got the person, the most personal, instantiated in physical reality fact. You have the entire arena that is beyond the arena even, and then you have what's moving in between those two things, both through time and space. So anyway, that yeah.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
you could think of history, like his story, as the biggest encompassment of all stories under that archetypal umbrella. And I think the Trinity, I think even Jordan Hall was talking about this, and maybe I'm misinterpreting him, but like he was saying that the Trinity is the natural breakdown of how reality unfolds. Because inevitably you have to have inevitably you have embodiment and you have the totality of whatever the embody is, and then you have the process that changes and through that so that is any story has to have those three things. It has to have the subjective, the objective, and then the change through time. Like
Yeah.
any story, that's the other thing about story, it's temporal. it's not it's not one moment in time, you know. Now you could say like all this happened in one moment in time, but that's not the way we experience reality. Like we experience reality as like this happened, oh, and then he took the DeLorean back to 1955 and did this and then did it. It's even though in that case you're still breaking the time space continuum or whatever, it's still like we're still receiving the story
Yeah.
in time.
You're still following their point. I think
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of exceptions to this. Shorts. I don't know if you've seen that movie. It was by the guy who made Shark Boy and Lava Girl and the Spy Kids movies,
Mm-mm.
which might be completely like missing any time that you would have ever seen any of those things.
I have seen
Um,
Spy, at least one Spy Kids movie because I have a daughter. But
okay,
yeah.
but the director of those is Robert Rodriguez, and he's an interesting guy. But he made a movie called Shorts, and it's a series of kind of not self-contained, but they're kind of shorter stories.
Mhm.
But they're linked, they're out of order chronologically, except for the last one, which is the final kind of capstone. And
Mhm.
they have elements kind of going through each of them that tie them all together because they're all in the same town. Uh, but you have to do the working in your head about like, oh, this is why this happened earlier in the movie. This is why there was a random alligator that was in a pit, and you find out only later that that's why.
Mm.
But even then, you still are doing the work retroactively to kind of put these events in the correct order
Mhm.
because we need to do that. But like with your time travel example, like we're always following the perspective of the people involved. You're never abandoning that, even though the world's timeline is different.
Mhm.
We always have to put it back into our own perspective of
The
this is
character
the
comes first. The character
Mhm.
comes first. And that's
Yeah.
the key thing about story in general. And that I was just having a conversation with Chad about what the innovation of AA is, and also like what we're doing in TLC. And it's like the person comes first.
Mhm.
Most Virtually every podcast that I know. Now, there are podcasts where people have developed a strong relationship, like Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter have an excellent, relationship and stuff. But like the, I think one thing that makes TLC unique is that it's not the ideas that come first. No matter who comes into the space, it's the person that comes first. It's the people that comes first. Now, Grim Grizz might disagree with that, but I don't. I agree with myself. Anyway, sorry. The what was I gonna say? Oh shoot, but that is the nature of story, is that you first have to, you can connect to more than one character, but the character has to come first. The subjective experience, the phenomenological inhabitation has to come first. I'm being smart words.
Well, my quippy line that I'm thinking of is something like, "There's a reason why The Hero with a Thousand Faces isn't the best-selling book in the world." Um, because a book about archetypes is not super interesting, right? Like people are, I think it's useful and it's a good tool, but it's not a story. It's
Mhm,
to point out the pattern of a story is not the story. The
mhm.
story has to be embodied. There has to be like a full example or a full playing out.
Have you been watching the conversations with Dempsey? I forget his full name.
Not yet.
Uh,
No, I haven't.
but okay, so yeah, he had one with PBK. Christian Baxter talked to him today. I didn't, or maybe yesterday, or and it was released today. I didn't watch the Christian Baxter conversation yet. Um, and it's the common it's the common argument that we have to go off of the evidence and off of science, and as opposed, like he's a meta modernist, and my interpretation of his project is he's trying to weave in the best practices of everything that we can objectively evaluate through the scientific method to create the best structures of meaning that we possibly can. The problem with that is the word objective, in that that pursuit already is through a subjective frame. Like we're stuck in the story first. So the story has to be like, in order to, let's say, weave together the best practices of different faiths and different traditions, you first have to define what best is.
Mhm.
And then how do you define what best is? So the problem is best is we act like it's a objective construct, and it's a subjective, it's it's a Boolean
Yeah.
word. It's a Boolean word that approximates a subjective construct, but it's not truly subjective because there's cross subjective agreement on some things are better than others. Like let's say having $1 million is better than having $10. Well, not always, because then you
Or
get
what?
robbed. And for what? Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even in that case, it's only better because it's quantifiable. Yeah. So going back to the idea of let's say a meta modern worldview, is you're still in the subjective narrative. Like you're still stuck in what constitutes the best and what's better and what's worse. And it's that quality question that I'm just going on and on about in on my channel, the elusive, because we have this sense that there is a better and there is a best, and I'm a firm believer that there is a better and there is a best, but I am also a firm believer that the narrative comes first, the story comes first,
Mhm.
and the story is what's like most elemental, and because we don't know what's better or best until we, let's say, experience it or live in it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the basic kind of response, and this might sound kind of rude, but it's like you haven't quite deconstructed enough. Like there's like that's part of the meta modern project is you've kind of got to find the foundation. And if we're still on the question of asking these questions about what's better based off of kind of scientific reasoning, I think you're not quite there yet. You need to ask those questions. But yeah, that's been one thing that I've been processing too, continually, even how to express that to people, because sometimes that's kind of difficult to get across, because people
Hmm.
would be like, oh, obviously, like, um you know this X is better because more people are happy, and that leads to better outcomes and everybody's healthier. And I'm like, well, that's not obvious. Like that there's a lot that goes into that. And how do you express that's not obvious? That like that's not the way it has to be. And maybe it is good it's that way, but how do you, yeah, it's a tough kind of problem.
And again, so this is why I go back to you can't grab it for
Hmm.
the same reason you can't grab art.
Yeah.
Because if you try to say, I know what's best, or the government knows what's best, or they know what's best, or this knows what's best, and you try to grab it, the more you tighten your fist, the more star systems will slip through your fingers.
Hmm.
I'm probably messing up that quote, but close enough.
Well, and there's something to why Star Wars has such a Taoist influence. And it's the harder you try to hold on to it, the more it's going to elude you.
And so I think the common response to that would be, okay, what are you just saying throw up your hands and do nothing? And I no, like I'm not saying that. uh I don't know. It's weird. We have these tropes like let go and let God. And I just love the tropes like that because the smart person looks at that and throws up their hands in exasperation and
Mm.
man plans and God laughs. But yeah, I would say the short answer is yes. I worry a lot less. I won't say I worry about things generally, but I worry far less simply believing that as if I'm doing the will of a supreme creator of all things who knows all things, if I'm doing the will of that being who I believe is love, which is a leap of faith in and of itself, there's many leaps of faith in there. But if I'm doing that, that's really all I need to worry about because the rest of it is like you're an ant climbing on an ant hill trying to move one grain of sand. Maybe you're meant to move that grain of sand. And to the extent that you, let's say, receive unexpected grace in your endeavors, then you can appreciate it. Gavin within TLC, he tells the story of the Chinese farmer where
Hmm.
something bad happens, and that's a perfect example of what I'm referring to. I don't know the story. Gavin knows it, so but like something bad happens, and they're like, "Oh, that's such a tragedy," and the farmer's like, "Maybe." Something good happens, and they say, "Oh, that's so amazing." He's like, "Maybe," but yeah, it's as I was reading the Bible for the first time, one thing that struck me about the Jewish people is, and I'd never seen this really illustrated as well as I think the Jewish people do this throughout the Old Testament, is every time they get humbled, every time their city gets destroyed, their empire, not empire, but their country gets messed up, um, they always blame themselves. They always take on the responsibility. It's like rip your clothes, put earth on your head in repentance. The ripping of the clothes is like, I'm naked before God. Like I was wrong. Like I was wrong. Whatever I was doing before, I was wrong, and change me. Like change me. And it was that. I think that's the key. I think it's not about not doing anything. It's more of being in a mindset that you're not in control and you can strive for things that you believe to be good, but probably the most important thing is the willingness to be corrected by, you can call it the ground of being, the fabric of reality, you can call it whatever it is, but that's humility, is the willingness to be corrected. And the earnest, I would say the earnest seeking of truth, goodness, and beauty. Of yeah. And yeah. Uh anyway.
I think
Yeah,
one
go ahead.
thing that you triggered in my mind is the let go and let God thing. I think sometimes, at least for me, in the way I processed it, it's something like and this is why I've struggled with it. It's because I process it like Zen Buddhism or something, where it's like I need to let go and like release all attachment and just kind of like let everything happen and this is the idea I've been throwing around is that you have to you have to push push somewhere, even if it's not exactly right. You actually have to have a drive to go somewhere. Um, and you know, to wrestle with God, it requires you to wrestle. If God is just pinning you to the ground, then that's not wrestling. Um, my friend Bo
Mm.
says that this is a, I don't know if his dad got this from somewhere, but apparently his dad says God can't drive a parked or steer a parked car. And this idea of like you have to engage for play to happen, for
Mhm.
this interaction to happen. And sometimes people, I think like for myself, I've been more of a perfectionist in this idea of like I don't want to mess up in my life. And so I'll stop myself from doing anything that could have an impact because maybe I do it wrong. But in the places where I've been willing to risk and say, well, maybe I will be wrong, um, I've always had something good come from it. And so yeah, that was just kind of that other-handedness, I guess. Like
Mhm.
on the one hand, there's this, but like this is something that I've been processing too.
Yeah. I think I'm going to talk about my speculations, and then I will talk about what I found in my own personal experience. And so I have much more faith in what I'm going to tell you from my own personal experience than the speculations. But I'm going to
Mhm.
start with the speculations first. Uh, there's my speculation is that there's a difference in the East versus West mentality, not so much in the detachment from the reality or from
Mhm.
the world. Kale had an excellent quote that I actually clipped. And maybe I could even play that because I clipped it, and let me see if I can find it. And I loved it because this is what I'm trying to do. I'm going to play it, and then when we edit out the break in the middle, I can just put in the real clip. Uh, if you're okay with that,
Sure.
because this was Kale's defense against the dark arts conversation with PVK, and I don't know if you saw that
Sorry, there's like
conversation.
lightning going on or something outside.
Real lightning,
We never get it out here.
really? Oh,
Yeah, no. The Pacific Northwest doesn't get a lot of lightning, even though we get a lot of rain. Oh,
that is that an ominous sign? Does that mean
doesn't
that
rain symbolize change?
I found it. I found the clip. Okay,
Okay,
hold on.
sweet.
All right. So,
What I'm worried about with my own students is how can I get them to affect a both a detached and deeply engaged standpoint
yeah,
to see the world.
yeah.
That's the thing.
When Kale said that, my mind was like, man, that captured in that captured the essence of what I strive to want to do, what I think is the right thing to do. It's both this worldly detachment and engagement. It's opponent processing, but that's one thing to say, but it's another thing to like, okay, how can you be deeply engaged in a world and yet detached from it? It's almost like so pretend you're starting playing a role-playing game of some kind. And you know it's the best role-playing game ever made. You know it's the
Mhm.
best one ever made. And you know that many other people are playing this role-playing game. But you also know that the creator of this game fully intended that that role-playing game is going to be deeply, deeply engaging and the most important game that all those players ever made, ever do, you know. And you also know that like what happens to you in the role-playing game really isn't up to you because the world's changing in real time and it's out of your hands. But you also know that the creator of that role-playing game has a place for you. And not only that, they know precisely what the best role for you is, and they know it way better. And you also know that this role-playing game is presented as a gift to you. Is presented as a gift of like, hey, I'd like you to experience this. And it's like this magic that you've
Mhm.
never experienced. But you got to lean into it. And so it's presented as this gift and this challenge. But like at the same time, you don't worry about it too much because you do the best you can, and you know it's out of your hands. Like the actual game is out of your hands in the meantime, but at least you're given an opportunity to play.
Mhm.
At least you're given a, okay, here's your ticket, here's your token. And maybe you only get to play a few years, and then that, oh, your time's up. I'm sorry. But that's okay, because you don't know what else is in store after the game, But like, yeah, the question is, can you trust that? Can you trust two things? Can you trust that the game is very, very important, and that your role is very, very important? But also that whatever is ultimately governing the game is good. And what that means, and that goodness is like the most important thing. And so what that means is that whatever happens to you in the game, that you could trust it. If you could trust it, and yeah. I don't know. And does that have any salience for you, that analogy?
I think so.
Mhm.
I don't know. My mind immediately goes to like, I don't know, I'm very contrarian. So I'm thinking about all the things people could be thinking.
Sure. Go
And
for it.
and I'm like, well, you have the problem of evil that kind of comes up pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, like you say that, but then you have, infants dying in the womb or within the first moments of life.
I have an answer for that. You might not like
Yeah.
it, but I have an answer.
Yeah.
How much did those infants suffer before they were brought to whatever's next for them? You can't answer that question, and neither can
Yeah.
I. Neither of us can answer that question.
Mhm.
No one can answer the question of how much they suffer except them. And so not one of us can answer the question of, can we accept the suffering, except us, except me, myself, for my own suffering. I can only answer the question of, can I accept my own suffering? That's it.
Mhm.
I actually can't, I can't even accept the question of, can I accept my daughter's suffering or my wife's suffering? I can't even do that.
Yeah.
The best I can do is my own. And the best I can do is the the best I can do is be with them in theirs, if they are, and
Mhm.
play the best role I can. And so that's the crazy trust, the absolute crazy trust.
But I think the trust does require a little bit of pushback, right? Like it
Go
can't
ahead.
be totally, not pushback to you, but pushback in general.
Yeah.
Like you can't, trust doesn't mean go along with everything as if everything is okay and just um just keep on keeping on.
No, you're an active participant.
But you
You
do
do
have to
everything you can.
engage, and
You
yeah,
do everything you can to
like
make
I
things
think,
better.
well,
To use a
yeah.
qualifying term to make it. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think LOI Lama Shabbatanai. Like this like okay, no, like I am engaging
Why have you
like with this.
forsaken me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that's
Yeah.
it's not a it's you're fully in it. Um but being able to both be fully invested and be able to bring that all up, but then to be able to trust that you still are hurt nonetheless. Um and be able to accept it. That's not easy, but I don't know. That's
I
a
think
lesson that
I think
yeah.
most atheism comes from an inability to accept the suffering. Um, how would I say this? It comes from an inability to accept that the suffering of others is not your right to take on.
Hmm.
It comes from a pride of wanting to assume responsibility for the arena. So the starving child and the aborted fetus, baby, the kid, whatever it is, the raped and murdered mother,
Mhm.
the I'm not saying that we don't have a responsibility in those moments. We have the utmost responsibility to do whatever we can in those moments. What I'm saying is that we do not have the right to place ourselves as the final and sole arbiter of all evil or all terror, destruction, suffering. It's not ours to ultimately judge. And that's a horrifying thing it's a terrifying thing for me to say. Because I pray frequently that God does not put me in a situation that tests my own faith, because I know my faith could be tested, and I have suffered, but I know I could be put in a situation that would cause my suffering to be greater than I can bear. Like I do not trust myself to withstand suffering beyond a certain limit.
Yeah.
So when PVK says a Christian is someone who trusts Christ more than they trust themselves, that nails it for me. Like it's the terror of God. So in atheism, basically you're left with a denial of the terror of God. Because it's the denial of death. It's the denial that you don't have control over what happens, because you don't. And so
Well, it depends, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Because I think there's several ways that you can take it. I think non-nihilistic atheism is that. I think nihilistic atheism is the full acceptance, but it's the full acceptance in the worst possible way. It's accepting that I don't have any responsibility over any of this, but neither does anyone else. And so the last kind of strand has been cut and the world is falling.
Mm-hmm.
And was there even a world to begin with? That kind of thing is, no one can live that way.
If you take,
it's not sustainable.
Yeah. If you take a really good game, you are given precisely the right amount of agency in precisely the right moments in precisely the right ways. If you know what I mean. Like there's that correct tension of you can do just enough, but maybe it's also not enough. So then you have to go down another path and you have to struggle in a different way, because you came very close to getting to where you needed to be, but it wasn't quite enough. And so you thus need to struggle more. But a good game the arena adapts to your failures and your successes in that way. And so the agency question is a really good one, in that does our agency, how do I put this? The responsibility. I would say we have responsibility insofar as our agency extends. But there are some,
to whom much is given, much is expected. Or with great power comes great responsibility.
Great responsibility. Same idea. Yeah. And the reason I find being a Christian such a comfort, warm blanket, is just the continuous failures of Christ's apostles to live up to those standards, and the absolute forgiveness, and especially like Peter all the way at the head. I talk about Peter, like Peter just keeps growing on me with time, because it's like, I will never betray you, and then 3 times. So like, but the thing about Peter is he plays the game. He's an active participant always. Like God says, get out of the boat, Peter. He's like, okay.
Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting is when you look at the disciples, you have like Judas on one end and Peter on the other. The line between Peter and Judas is not as wide as people want it to be, or as they would have wanted it to be, I think. And when it comes down to it, it's Peter willing to participate and be able to not give up on the situation, and Judas giving up. And that's the real kind of dichotomy of that relationship.
the one thing we know about Judas is he was stealing from the purse. So
Mhm.
the one thing we know about him is he was trying to get something.
Yeah.
Like whatever that was, he was trying to get. We don't know like why, or we don't know what, but we know he was trying to grasp something. And maybe Peter was too. So I don't know. But like, but I hear you that Peter always, I think that's really what endears me more and more to Peter, is that he never gives up. He always
Yeah.
goes back.
Will both reach a point of ultimate betrayal to a certain extent, right? They both kind of reach this climax,
Mhm.
and they both respond, but one responds in despair, and well, they both respond in despair, but one doesn't give up and one does.
Mhm.
And when Peter doesn't give up, it's met with forgiveness because, well, we don't know about the other story, but this story we know does end in forgiveness,
Mhm.
which is the interesting process.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like, so maybe you, Noah, don't have any real choice in the role you play. Maybe that's
Mhm.
true, right? Maybe you just think you have choice and maybe you're just playing it out. But maybe you do have a choice in, like, we don't know. You know, I would say those who are sure on the free will question, I would say, well, you don't really have any other choice other than to assume. It's almost Pascal's wager. Like,
Mhm.
so let's say I was an atheist who didn't believe in free will. Still, you should probably go with Pascal's wager. It's probably because you don't know that you don't have some agency in free will. And I'm actually pretty sure we have a good amount of free will, and that God is more like dancing with us to craft the final, like it's the arena agent relationship. But then it's the question, like, okay, who do you want to be in the story?
Mhm.
And and I don't even mean, and again, I don't mean that from like an outcome, like I'm gonna be this and I'm gonna get this and it's more of like, I was the guy that when this happened, I acted this way. And there was tell really quick story. I've told this before, but it's a funny story. So I feel like I can get away with telling it a few times in different places. So I was early on in my conversion journey. I think this was before COVID, like 2019-ish. And I woke up and I was already kind of like tired and little grumpy. And I go to the coffee maker and my coffee maker's broken. So I'm already like more grumpy. And okay, so I say to myself, all right, here's my plan. I'm going to go to McDonald's. I'm going to get a coffee and maybe some breakfast. And then I will go to Walmart after that and buy a new coffee, Mr. Coffee, and then come home. So I go to McDonald's and sitting in line, and it's 5 minute wait or 10 minute wait. And so I'm more grumpy because I haven't had coffee. And then the lady hands me a coffee in her glove, and I take this coffee, and as I take it, it is literally the hottest cup of coffee I have ever felt in my entire life. It's so hot that I'm startled just in the touching and taking of it, and my hand goes like this, and then so like as I'm pulling it in, my hand is like this because it's so hot, and the it's like splashes out, like it comes loose, and it splashes all in my thighs. And so as this like boiling hot coffee is dripping from my shorts down my thighs, like it drips down into the seat and it's burning my butt. And so I like lurch up out of my seat like this, which means I take my foot off the brake.
The
So
break.
my car, and I see the out of the corner of my eye, I see the McDonald's employee with this like horrified look on her face as I'm like lurching forward out of the McDonald's drive-through line in this coffee. And finally, like it cools down under my thighs and my butt, that like I get control of the car and like I pull into a spot that's like to the side of the McDonald's drive-through line. And then I hear the lady say from the window, I hear her say, "Are you okay?" And like obviously she did not intend this and it's not her fault at all. And and then like I'm sitting there in my burned thighs with like no coffee and my soaked pants and this drive-through line that I only had to sit there because my coffee maker broke in the morning. And in that moment, I just started laughing hysterically. I just started laughing hysterically. And I looked up and I'm like, really, guys? Like really the most. Like because and in the laughing hysterically in that moment, I had this like gratitude just like pouring into me, like this gratitude because I'm like, oh man, I am being changed. Because if this happened to me like 5 years earlier, I would have been really angry. I don't know what I would have done, but I would have been really angry. And I just I went home, I changed my pants, I went to Walmart and I got a new coffee maker and I had this sense of gratitude the rest of my day. Like really, really. And and the sense of gratitude was like in that moment of a series of like really bad events that could that my heart had already been changed enough such that I did not have any desire to punish anyone or anything. And I was just so grateful that I had been changed sufficiently up to that point. Why did I tell you that story?
We're talking about free will and determinism.
Yes. Yeah. So in that moment, did I have free will to hysterically start laughing instead of be angry? I don't know if I had free will to do that, but I think what I did have free will to do over this previous years was to aim in a different direction. And so going back to the left brain, right brain, my theory on that is that however your left brain is aiming in your life, it gradually changes your right brain. And what your right brain receives also gradually changes your left brain, right? If you're reading deep things and listening to interesting things and you're challenging yourself, that's obviously, and receiving those, that's obviously changing your left brain as well. So it's that dance in between. So I in the moment, you know, that's where the let go and let God happens.
Yeah.
But it's in the aim that I think we do have a tremendous amount of agency. You know, I can't. So another way of thinking about that is like the basketball player on the court when they receive the ball and they know they have a split second, but they know it in their right brain. They're not thinking about it. They know they just have a split second to get the ball and take the shot or it's over. And they do it and they do it. And my point is that in that moment there is no agency. It's just they're going, they're doing it. There's no agency. But my point is that all the actions and the practices and the steps and everything that they did in their basketball career, even from their childhood to get them to that point, that was all within their agency. It was all part of that dance. Like they had to constantly sacrifice and work and that is the nature of sacrifice. Like that is it. I mean, you know this. I'm lecturing to the choir, but
yeah. Well, I think one thing that has been on my mind lately is that within the last few years, and this is a very like, I don't know, maybe a response that people won't like, but the reason why I don't actively believe in determinism is because the people who I see who believe in like full determinism don't anecdotally don't act kind to people. And I think that's about it, where it's just like if whether or not it's true, it's like the practical element of it is what does it mean to act as a person who believes that everything is not decided by the way that they act. Like, I don't want to be that person, so I'm not gonna even entertain it. So in my own life, I think it's a lot closer to both and, right? I think there's something true about both ends of the spectrum of like there is like God is supreme, and you know you can't he's outside of time. Like there's not like nothing I can do in causality will change what he has control over. But maybe he gives me control of this chapter, and maybe I can choose where it goes to a certain extent, but I can't change the end of the book. And even though he might know what I'm going to choose, that doesn't change the fact that I still make the choice. So I don't know. I think this is why Paul will say stuff like people aren't really interested in this conversation. Like it's because I think there's a certain point where it's like you come down to this of free will and determinism. It's like, I don't know. In the end, you kind of act
Yeah.
in the world. And
You're stuck in, even if you think it's deterministic, you're stuck in the illusion of free will anyway. The way your phenomenology presents itself to you in your day-to-day life is, yeah. And what you were just saying about the seeing the people who are deterministic or believe in determinism not treating others well. Well, for me, it's like I want to lean into the stories of people who I see that are in the right story, you could say, you know, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to become your friend, is because there were a number of things that impressed me about you, but like I was like, oh man, it's seems like he's also aiming for the right story.
yeah.
So
well, and I'd say the same for what I saw of you really early on, and being able to connect with other people and seek like personal connection first, like the personalism being really important, and then using that as a jumping off point to understand like the whole meta modern thing you were saying before about like it all needs to be kind of built from the ground up. And so that's going to start first with community, and then from there it just grows.
cool.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been going for a while. I can go a little bit longer. I'll give you some other thoughts. Trust hyperinflation. We could save that for next time, because I posted a comment that we're living in a time on another one of your videos that we're living in a time of trust hyperinflation, and cover group dynamics, group interactions, interdenominational relationships. Yeah, whatever you want to do.
I don't know how much time we have for some of those other things. Do we want to, is there anything you wanted to loop back on that we might have missed? Some gaps in things we talked about? I'm trying to think of some of those as well.
Well, I'll tease it here, but
Okay.
I'm talking to Gavin in 1 week about transhumanism, and specifically my journey and my, I would say, dogmatic entry into transhumanism. Like looking at it now, like that was definitely my religion. And although I wasn't like an adherent that went to transhumanist church, whatever that would be, I was more of like a McMosive who, you know, oh, I'm too cool for a specific church, but I'm definitely a transhumanist.
You're in the
And
transhumanist what is a hallway in a spaceship, like the transhumanist airlock or whatever.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so but I figure from that conversation, I bet you'll have a number of things. But because talking about AI and some other conversations, Gavin's like, oh, we could talk about transhumanism. And I'm like, can I tell you about transhumanism? But yeah, we could subsequently talk about that, I'm sure.
Well, now I'm excited, but I'm selfishly excited because I'm curious because I don't that's my that might be that Fallout video with transhumanism might be my favorite video that I made.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's not one anyone ever wants to talk about. And so
Interesting.
I'd be curious to hear your
I'll check it out.
hear
But
your thoughts.
maybe let me check it out after my conversation with Gavin.
You should, yeah.
Because one of my subplots, one of my side quests for my conversation with Gavin is to get you interested in the original Deus Ex to play it.
Okay.
So
and I might, yeah.
But you'll see based on the conversation with Gavin why. That's my hope, is for your eyes to go like, whoa, like.
Got it.
So, but we'll see.
Well, that one's sorry, I'm gonna keep talking about this
Yeah,
because I'm excited about I'll yeah, I'm excited to play Deus Ex because I do want to sit down, and this gives me a good excuse
I
but
think there's I think there's a new release of it with better graphics. I could be wrong about that.
yeah,
Whether it's the same story.
there's like
But,
a mod somewhere that like
mm,
redoes all the graphics or something.
mhm,
I played the reboots, so
yeah,
it's not the same, but like
Human
Human Revolution, I
Human
played.
Revolution is very. I played Human Revolution and Mankind Divided. Human
Yeah,
Revolution is very good. It's very good,
it
but
is. Yeah,
it's not on the
no,
level of the original.
no,
Just
it's not
but
the same.
yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm,
so I'm excited. In my the way my video is structured is it's kind of like the nihilism video, uh but it's kind of going at several different like both major figures in transhumanism, like
mhm,
modern transhumanism and
mhm,
the philosophers, and then kind of talking about some of these questions that are brought up
mhm.
about like extending life and
Oh, we're
um
gonna get into it.
yeah,
It's gonna be great.
and about how political it is. I think that's something that nobody ever talks about, is like the political aspect is super important,
Okay,
I
so that's
think.
something I know very little about.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay, so
Okay.
that might be a fun one to we can come back to and talk about that. That's
Yeah. So I basically asked Gavin, I said, hey, is it okay if I kind of tell my story? It might be like half an hour of like, I haven't really told my transhumanist story. So like I'll tell that story. It's like half an hour probably. And he's like, oh yeah, that'd be fine. So and but
sweet.
yeah, yeah. So I guess I would ask anybody who's watching, if any of those other topics, or if anything within transhumanism, if there's something you'd like us to talk about. Also, anything in relation to art, right brain, left brain, any of the other things I talked about, like
Anything we
trust,
missed?
hyperinflation. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, if there's anything that exactly, if there's anything that we just like touched on, but you'd like us to delve into in more detail. So no,
sweet.
yeah, thanks, Noah. This has been awesome.
Uh,
I always feel like you let me talk way too much. Sorry, go ahead.
oh, okay. I don't know. I'm getting better at learning that people want to be interrupted
Yeah,
somewhat,
I'm
and
from New
so I'm
Jersey. Like, just do it. Just
okay.
interrupt.
It's part of the learning process. But one of the things is oh, is that video going to be on Friday Morning Nameless?
Uh, our first one.
No, 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 the
The
Gavin
Gavin.
comment.
Yeah, that was our plan. Was we
Okay.
make it a fragment. Yeah,
Then I'll post the link to at least the channel below. And then
cool.
if the video comes out or if there's a link, I'll put that down there too. So
It'll probably come out next Thursday, but presuming that all goes to plan and we actually meet on Wednesday. But I'm excited to have that discussion. Just like I'm excited to talk to you. So yeah.
cool. So I will have not seen the conversation,
Mhm.
but I'll hear what you have to say about the conversation. I'll be the interview after.
Yeah.
That sounds like?
I was thinking we could talk again in 2 Wednesdays.
Oh, in
Uh,
2 Wednesdays. Okay.
what? No, because if we continue these
Oh,
discussions
it's
every
this
other.
upcoming Thursday?
No. So I'm having to discuss. We're just bogging down
Sorry.
our audience.
No,
with
okay. Anyway, I okay, I get it
sort it
now. I
out.
think I get it now. Anyway, thank you
Yeah.
all for watching,
Yeah.
and have a good rest of your week.
Yeah. See you next time.
See ya.